After a long break, welcome back. So, in the last video, we got prepped and ready to enter an endurance race with our beautiful Peugeot 206. We were entering a race called the Gumbalkan Grand Prix at Autodrom Most, which is about an hour's drive north of Prague. This race differs quite a bit from the 4-hour event we did a few years back in the BMW because this was less of an open race for enthusiast cars. Back then, we were one of the slowest cars on the track. The Gumbalkan, on the other hand, is all about cheapness and stupidity. You buy a car for under 25,000 Czech crowns, which is about €1,000, do minimal performance upgrades and maximum mods to aesthetically ruin the car. Unfortunately, we did have one of the tamest looking cars there, since 3-foot high spoilers, side-mounted exhaust and turbos sticking out of the bonnet were not only permitted but encouraged. When we showed up, we were supposed to go through scrutineering, but since we had one of the few cars that drove to the track under its own power, we were basically just waved through.
That'll do.
Although this was still a 6-hour endurance race, so it involved some effort to keep the car out on the track and at least pretend to stay competitive. So, for example, I found that refueling was a really slow process during our last race, so I made a dump tank out of a 25-litre coolant bottle, a fuel filler hose, and a swimming pool pump valve. It looked a bit rednecky, but it worked really well. It did start to leak pretty badly during the second fill-up, and the filler cap was right above the hot brake disc at the time. Without any water available, I had to jump into action with some all-natural liquid brake cooling, which, unbeknownst to myself, was being watched by the organisers. They did seem to love it and posted it on their official TikTok. There was a genuine Le Mans start to get us going, and it was even better than you could imagine. Not only did you have a bunch of wannabe race car drivers running to their cars and trying not to crash into each other, but because these cars were all pretty terrible to begin with, some of them wouldn't even start once the race had actually started. Once we got moving, we got the vibe that our car was somewhere in the lower half of the grid, performance-wise. But that was good enough to really get into it. Unlike our last race, we were actually able to start battling and overtaking with other teams, but with increased confidence came increased riskier driving. Our first spin came early in the race, and it wouldn't have even been notable if the car hadn't decided to not start again, so the track was yellow flagged and the car had to be towed back into the pits. To this day, we still don't know why it does this, but it just needed a jump start and it was back up and going again, just with our pride severely damaged. After we got a few more laps logged, we changed drivers and got our next spin out of the way, but this time it was into a gravel pit. So we blew a tyre and, unbeknownst to us, scraped something on the underside. We got the car back into the pits, the tyre changed, and the car back out there with yours truly behind the wheel. Shortly after getting back on track, other drivers started shouting at me that there were loads of sparks coming out the back of our car. Turned out the front section of the exhaust had been smacked pretty severely during the gravel pit spin, so it was hanging off and scraping on the track. So had to get back to the pits and get that pulled off ASAP. So that also led to another problem once we got the car back out. The hot exhaust gases were not escaping out of the back of the car and were accumulating in the engine bay. This was causing much higher engine temperatures, so again we had to get the car back to the pits and get the bonnet whipped off to get some airflow over the block to push the exhaust gases out beneath the car, and because it's such a sheddy car, the battery needed to be ratchet strapped down as well. This actually solved the overheating problem, and the engine was able to redline without overheating. Plus, our car actually started to match the haggard aesthetic of everyone else on the grid. Racing in a car with no bonnet or exhaust did feel pretty cool. The 206 actually performed really well considering the abuse we gave it. The brakes were legitimately really good and performed flawlessly. I mean, it probably did help that that car came with the 206 GTI brakes fitted as standard, and it was just a normal 1.6 16 valve, so it was lighter and it wasn't as fast, so the drop in performance did help us in the long run. The winter tyres were a mistake, but the previous year's Gumbalkan had a load of snow on the track, so we were assuming the worst and didn't have the budget for a load of different sets. The suspension was circa 2002 standard Peugeot shocks and springs, so the body roll was absolutely killing us. And although the bushes on the car had looked good prior to the race, we found out afterwards that the anti-roll bar bushes were almost non-existent since they aren't an easily accessible part on the 206s. So previous owners obviously wanted to save some money and didn't bother changing them, and we couldn't see where they were, so you live and learn. Overall, we can't complain, since the car was bought and prepped just a few weekends before the actual race, so the fact we weren't going home in a low loader was a win alone in our books. Since we had so many stupid pit stops, we placed in the bottom third, but if we were more organised with the car's downtime, we would have been way higher up based on our lap times. This has given us the motivation to come back and try again properly next time. Just for your guys' information, the cars that performed best were a couple of Ford Focus ST170s that were just dominating the lap times and were really reliable. There were a couple faster cars on track, like a 3.5 V6 Honda Accord with an oil cooler sticking out of the bonnet, and a Mercedes SLK compressor that had the most insane supercharger whine, but these faster cars also had reliability problems, so they didn't place very high. There was a definite battle strategy of getting a more reliable mundane car and just focusing on the endurance aspect, or getting something fast or heavily modified that was really haggard and risk a load of breakdowns. We took option 3 of the unreliable mundane car, but we can improve that for the next race. So post-race, I've actually been dailying the 206 around Prague, and occasionally it would still refuse to start for an unknown reason. Tried to do everything, tried to diagnose whatever it could be, but no luck. I guess it's just, early 2000s French wiring. Plus, it has no exhaust after the cat, so it sounds ridiculous. But other than that, it's still a great little car with loads more life to live. Unfortunately, life has been getting in the way, so getting this video edited was delayed for absolutely ages. That being said, we just did a load of stuff with the 206, so those videos will be coming out before the end of the year, so stay tuned for what's coming next. If you like what you saw, give us a subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next one.